Thank you, Senator Lawless. Senator Niall O'Donnell, you have 8 minutes.
Minister, last week we debated a bill on banning goods from illegal colonial settlements entering Ireland. I laid out my deep concern about Israel's continued illegal occupation of Palestine, including these settlements and the apartheid system it enforces there. I also raised the case of Ahed Tamimi, who remains imprisoned in an Israeli military jail. The Minister last week neglected to call for her immediate release then, so perhaps, Minister, you could do so on behalf of the government now. Minister, it was reported last week that in January a 14-year-old epileptic Palestinian girl was arrested by Israeli authorities and sent to the Gaza Strip for 2 weeks, even though her home is with her parents south of Ramallah in the West Bank. The girl was arrested as an illegal alien on January 13th in East Jerusalem because she didn't have the right Israeli-issued permit to be in Jerusalem. She was released on bail and taken by the Israeli authorities to the Gaza Strip because it was listed in records as her father's place of residence, even though she had never been there in her life. The traumatised child was stuck in Gaza for 2 weeks before she could return home. This is another example in a litany of brutal daily reality that exists for Palestinians and what they face under Israel's occupation and enforced apartheid regime. Minister, Israeli authorities on Sunday tore down 2 EU-funded classrooms that were part of a school for children in the occupied West Bank because they said they were built illegally. This is the 5th time that they have done this since 2016. So, Minister, how does the government plan on holding Israel to account for destroying schools built with Irish and EU taxpayers' money? Will you demand compensation and the rebuilding of the schools? Minister, it's time for your department and the government to respect the democratic wishes of the Seanad and the Dáil, as well as the Irish people, and urgently officially recognise the state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. I also want to raise with you my concerns regarding the current political situation in Catalunya. On the 21st of December, in elections called after the Spanish government revoked Catalunya's home rule, the Catalan people once again give political parties who support Catalan independence a parliamentary majority. However, the leader of the biggest party is in exile in Belgium, and the leader of the second biggest party remains imprisoned by the Spanish authorities. The leaders of the 2 main grassroots pro-independence civil society groups also remain imprisoned. The Catalan Parliament is still trying to elect its president because the Spanish government is threatening to arrest more Catalan MPs if they go ahead with the vote to re-elect pro-independent President Charles Puigdemont. Like many others, I am truly appalled at the approach and provocative actions of the Spanish government. Picking a new president should not mean criminal consequences or negative legal effects for MPs. The continued prosecution of Catalan ministers, MPs, civil society activists and the Speaker of the Catalan Parliament is completely unacceptable and undemocratic. The Spanish government must turn away from its clearly confrontational approach and instead enter into meaningful negotiations with the Catalan government to find an acceptable path forward through inclusive dialogue. Bear in mind, we'll all gather, Minister, this year and next to commemorate elections too and the sitting of a so-called illegal parliament. Minister, I also want to raise with you my deep concern about what is happening in Colombia at present. While it is welcome that the FARC and the Colombian government have agreed a historic peace deal, the Colombian government is failing to protect vulnerable community leaders and human rights defenders from right-wing paramilitaries. Last year, at least 170 community leaders were killed in Colombia, and 21 were killed last month alone. Colombia's ombudsman last week said that community leaders in Colombia face, quote, extermination. He called on the Colombian government to prioritise their protection and said its failure to do so was, quote, assisting in their extermination. Minister, I would ask that you raise with Minister Coveney that he brings up with his counterpart in Colombia the completely unacceptable assassination of these social and political leaders. And hopefully you can pledge on behalf of Minister Coveney Ireland's support to these human rights defenders who are under threat at present. I also want to condemn, Minister, Turkey's ground offensive and invasion of Syria and its attacks on Afrin in north-western Syria. Turkey's military attacks on Afrin have caused huge civilian casualties. They are wrong and they must be condemned by all. We have already seen the human rights violations that the Turkish army have committed against Kurds in south-east Turkey, and it's clear that their brutal tactics will be replicated against Kurds in Afrin. The Kurdish People's Protection Units, the YPG, has been successfully fighting Daesh in this region. Turkey's attacks will hamper the fight against Daesh, which is not completely surprising given the many questions surrounding Turkey's covert support for radical jihadist groups in this region. So I would urge again, Minister, that you condemn their attacks on Afrin and that it also be raised with your counterparts in the Turkish government. Lastly, on this point, Minister, I want to speak out against Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates' brutal attacks and blockade of Yemen, which has plunged the country into the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. UNICEF's latest report, Born into War, details how children in Yemen have been scarred by years of violence, displacement, disease, poverty, undernutrition and a lack of access to basic services, including water, healthcare and education, because of the war and the Saudi blockade. More than 11 million children, nearly every child in Yemen, now needs humanitarian assistance, and famine is a very real prospect. So, Minister, I would urge you to support an arms embargo on Saudi Arabia and other necessary measures to create a peaceful political solution to this conflict. And I would call on your department to respond generously to UNICEF's appeal for $312 million in 2018 to continue responding to the urgent needs of children in Yemen. Catherlock, I'll finish on the last 2 points very briefly. Minister, in relation to your contribution on PESCO, I have to respectfully disagree, and I've made my views known to Minister Keogh in relation to the state's participation in PESCO. I think we have much to be proud of in terms of the record of the Defence Forces' participation in humanitarian search and rescue missions in the Mediterranean. Not only do I believe PESCO will hamper and erode Ireland's neutrality, but it also has the real possibility of changing the whole nature of the humanitarian efforts that we have undertaken in the Mediterranean to support and save many refugees. In relation to Brexit in the North, my last point, alas, Catherlee and other colleagues have already said it, I always resent coming in to statements on foreign affairs and having to talk about the North and Brexit when both of them are indeed home affairs and should be treated as such. In the last few days, Minister, Irish language groups in the North, in the context of the talks which Minister Coveney is taking part in at present, they have made an appeal to the party leaders, to the British Secretary of State, Karen Bradley, and Minister Coveney to come out and meet with the Irish language sector, to meet with groups and organisations who live their lives and work and contribute to society day in and day out, to try and cut through some of the mistruths, the ignorance, and in many cases the bigotry expressed towards that community, to come out and hear the experience of that community for themselves. The people who sent that letter to the Minister on behalf of the Irish-speaking community have yet to receive an acknowledgement. So I respectfully urge that officials take that on board, that they seek to engage with that sector, but most importantly of all, that they get out and they meet and they hear from them and they understand not the media narrative that exists around the Irish-speaking population, but the actual reality. So, Gara Maiga, I'll ask Catherlee.
Senator